Greetings, everyone. I'm Larry Williams, the Director of the Center for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis, or CARMA, at Virginia Commonwealth University. And I'd like to welcome you to one of our Meet the Methodologist sessions, in which I'll be having a friendly chat with Peter Westfall. As you may know, Peter is Professor of Statistics, Information Systems, and Quantitative Sciences at Texas Tech University. He's also the Senior Editor of the American Statistician, and later on today he'll be doing a webcast lecture that's offered as part of our CARMA Consortium webcast program. So, Peter, thanks for making the trip, and welcome to CARMA.
My pleasure.
We'll begin with our conversation with the question of just how did you get interested in statistics?
How did I get interested in statistics? That's a good one. Well, I started out, as we talked last night, as a music major, which is kind of a switch from statistics, but it seemed like maybe that wasn't going quite the way I thought it might go. I spent a year as a music major, and then I thought, what should I do? And spent another year soul searching, and took all kinds of classes, and finally took some math classes, and wound up getting an undergraduate in math, but then still was wondering what to do with that. Statistics looked like a good place where there might be some employment prospects, so I decided to go to graduate school in statistics, and always really loved it. I think the entryway for me was mathematics, so that was my the inroad, so to speak.
Yeah, and while you were a student, did you have a particular statistics course that you enjoyed a lot, and can you recall any of the challenges that you faced as a student learning statistics?
It was, the first course I took was a probability course, and I didn't do that well in it. And but it made me think that I really needed to get going on that, because I always did well in math, and then I hit probability, and it was like a complete different world. And even to this day, it seems that in my teaching of statistics, that is the same place that trips other people up too, is just trying to view statistics as a response to a probability model. And I have that's my main struggle, I think, in trying to get this across, is to get people to view the structure, the latent structure, if you will, of whatever it is they're studying as a generative process, as a probability model that's actually generating the observations, and then putting it in that framework. Once they get it, it seems like they start saying things correctly, they start understanding things correctly. But like for me, it was a big switch to try to get to that point of thinking about things in a probabilistic way rather than a deterministic way. And so that was the biggest struggle for me. But once I got over that, it was all kind of downhill. Well,
so why is it that people face that particular challenge, or are inclined to see things one way and find it to be such a challenge to see it a different way?
I don't know. I think it's a personality thing, or maybe it's a psychological thing, that people want things to be deterministic. I think. I don't know if there's been some research on this, but I think people want to sort of have certainty. They want to say, if we plug in X, we get a Y. There's an equation, Y equals F of X. And when you throw uncertainty in there and you say, well, Y doesn't equal F of X, it's sort of related to F of X. And then to have that, to be able to sort of have that fuzziness and sort of say, well, what is Y really? What do we really get? And to be able to understand things as a probabilistic outcome. I think it's a struggle. I even have math students sometimes take my classes, and they struggle with it. Even though they're really good with all the technical stuff and they can solve all the equations, they don't. They struggle. The engineering students, some of them really have a hard time. It's amazing, because they really do well with the math, but they just don't get the technical thing. And sometimes the people in management kind of get the fuzzy aspect of the probability models pretty well, whereas the engineering students sometimes just have a huge difficulty trying to wrap their heads around this idea of randomness. And so that's a struggle that I just lately I've decided that in my teaching I'm just going to take that head on, and let's just try and get that right away. Put it in there right away and say, okay, let's look at things this way. And then after that, all the advanced stuff becomes more clear. You look at structural equations models, or models for logistic regressions, or just anything that gets more advanced than just your basic t-test. Having that structure sort of ingrained and getting people to look at things as responses to probability structures, it helps. And so that's been my struggles, to try to get people to look at things that way.
Well, Peter, you've obviously had a lot of experience in the preparation of manuscripts as an author. You also have been involved in the evaluation of manuscripts as a reviewer and as an associated editor and as editor. Could you share some about your perspectives on kind of the common shortcomings of scientific papers that you've considered in your various roles?
That I've reviewed,
Yeah.
kind of as a reviewer.
Or your perspective based as an editor in the decision in looking at the reviews?
Yeah. The common shortcomings, well, write the paper well, that's a good thing. Start out, use good sentence structure, good logical flow, I mean, sort of the obvious things. But that's sort of a no-brainer. It really depends on the kind of paper it is. If it's a theory and methods paper, the theory has to be good and the methods have to be good. If it's an applications paper, the assumptions have to be laid out clearly, at least for the kind of things that I do. I'm an editor of a statistics journal, so if I see an applications paper and they're trying to make a case about, whatever, gun control, we've got a paper we just published on gun control. It's kind of an interesting question as to whether gun control laws, do they actually reduce murder rates or not? If you take guns out of people's hands, there's actually two arguments you can make. Some people would say, well, if you don't have the guns, how are you going to shoot them when they come through the door and try to get you? And other people would say, well, if there's less guns, there's going to be less violence. And so there's arguments either way. But from my standpoint as a statistics journal editor, I want to see the assumptions laid out very clearly, especially with these observational studies. There's a lot of leeway there, and you really have to be careful about the assumptions you're making and about the arguments that you're making from those assumptions. So from my standpoint, I want to see all that laid out very clearly, because it's never cut and dried. You can never make cut and dried causal claims from these studies. And so I want to see exactly what they are assuming so that we know where the question lies. Where does the rubber really hit the road in terms of the assumptions they're making and how they're trying to draw the conclusions from the assumptions. And so to me, it all comes down to the assumptions. If you can assume it's true just to begin with and you're done, but you probably want to assume the structure and then try to see how the data modifies that structure. But still, the assumptions you make at the outset about the structure are going to be paramount in whether you can believe the conclusions or not. So for me, it's just laying out the assumptions. What's independent of what? I think independence is probably one of the biggest things. If you have a causal model, what is the actual assumption you're making on the causality structure? Are you controlling for all the right things? The usual kind of stuff.
In management papers, I think there are some people who would say that one of the frequent shortcomings is that authors, don't clearly lay out the underlying theory or the mechanism or the process that's presumed to engender the relationship that they're empirically testing.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
do you find the same things in the types of articles outside of the management discipline that you see?
I would say that that's true. I think I would want to go one step farther and see not only that the theory is laid out, but that theory is connected really very specifically to the mathematical model and the assumptions that are made about that mathematical model. And I think that that's something that it seems to me isn't done as much in the social sciences literature as I would like. For example, structural equations models, there's all kinds of assumptions of uncorrelatedness among error terms that nobody seems to question. And the reason they don't is because you can't test it. so it's like, okay, great, we'll just assume it, but it actually is hugely important, because if those error terms are correlated, everything goes all off. And so it's sort of one of my concerns is, why are some assumptions considered important and others not? And some of the most important ones people just simply sweep under the rug, and they say, oh, well, everybody else does it, so we'll do it too, and we don't even have to mention it.
My perspective is that so many times that the structural equation methodology can allow one to not make some of those restrictions that are required by the use of more traditional analytical techniques, but that authors that use SEM continue to go ahead and make those assumptions and seem to be pretty much unaware that they're doing them.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's a lot of just lack of understanding of what the assumptions really are in structural equation models, and really in everything else too. it seems like, people think, oh, statistician, he must be talking about the normality assumption. It's sort of like, that's what statisticians are concerned with, right? Is it normal or not? And that's actually sort of the least important thing in terms of when I talk about assumptions. It's usually independence of various things, error terms, exogenous variables and error terms among themselves. Just the data themselves, are their clustering effects, all that kind of stuff. But I think people tend to just give that short shrift because they're not maybe so comfortable with understanding the idea of a probability model, or I don't know. It's something that I think needs more education. We need more education to get people to understand how these probability models work, just to understand assumptions like independence. I like to use simulation a lot in my teaching. Get people to simulate data and say, okay, here's how the data would look if it is correlated. Here's how it would look if it's not correlated. Look at some graphs, look at some charts, and just get an understanding for how the data that they're going to observe might look if it really did come from a situation where the assumptions were satisfied or not satisfied. Try to build in that sort of visceral, intuitive understanding of how these models work. That's one of the ways that I try to teach this stuff.
Yeah. Peter, you've obviously been in the profession for a while and have had the opportunity to consider a wide range of published materials. And I guess I'm wondering whether you have a couple of favorite statistics books that are near to your heart or that you use regularly, and if so, what aren't those?
Books. When I took courses in my graduate work at the University of California, Davis, in statistics, we rarely had books. We didn't use books. The professors went and put their lectures on the board, and we asked questions, and kind of learned the material that way. And they also made a whole bunch of books available, and they might have had some favorites, but I kind of got used to not looking at books and trying to sort of develop stuff from the ground up, and that I think helped me a lot, was actually not having books and try to just logically reason through stuff really from the bottom up, from the base assumptions that you can have. Just, okay, let's start minimalistically and say, here's what we got, how can we build this edifice from the ground up? And I like that idea. I don't like sort of using books as dogmatic, sort of this is in this book and therefore we'll do it this way, because there's always problems. Every book I've ever looked at, well, not every one, but most of the books I've looked at that I thought it was as possible uses for teaching, I've had such problems with parts of them that I just couldn't possibly even let the students use them, or maybe they're just incomplete or just a different emphasis. So I don't use books for teaching. For my research, there's a couple books that I like a lot. One is related to my talk today, and it's by Alan Agresti, and it's called Categorical Data Analysis. Very excellent book, good balance of theory and applications, lots of applications, good social science applications in there. Another book I'm sure you're familiar with is Ken Boland's book on structural equations modeling, sort of a similar flavor of good balance between theory and applications. Another book, a recent one by a person I'm proud to call a friend. He very sadly just passed away, and maybe some of you have heard him. His name's David Friedman. He's a professor of statistics at the University of California, Berkeley. And his latest book was called Statistical Models, and very excellent emphasis on social science applications with particular emphasis on causality. And I would really highly recommend that book for anybody. And I'd just like to, again, acknowledge his passing. It was fairly recently. He was a giant in the field, not only in heavy theoretical statistics, but also with his contributions to the social sciences.
Peter, you mentioned your own research. Can you comment on some of the common methodological or analytical problems that you address or confront in your own research activities?
My research is a little bit eclectic, although my main theme has been in methods of multiple comparisons, theory and methods of multiple comparisons procedures. Started out with applications to biomedical research, and mostly, I guess those still are the applications when I think about where this stuff is applied. The issues tend to be, well, you do a clinical trial and you have a drug and it might affect your blood pressure, but it also might affect your heart rate. It might affect many things. It's a multivariate outcome. You take a drug and many things happen all simultaneously. And the idea is then to try to ferret out what effects are really significant or quote-unquote significant, however you want to phrase significance, in light of the fact that you're looking at so many outcomes. And this becomes important for marketing of the drug. The drug companies like to be able to say that it does everything. You know, it makes you live longer, it makes you happier, it improves your mood, and it cures the common cold. But when you're looking at so many different possible endpoints, it's very likely that some things will just pop out statistically significant by chance alone. And so ways to adjust or control for that has been a focus of my research, mostly through the consultations with the pharmaceutical companies. And anyway, so I've developed a lot of multiple comparisons procedures, a lot of theory and methods for them. Well, the main issue is just, is the theory right? You know, I mean, and is the theory interesting? Is the question you're addressing? It's usually sort of a mathematical question about, does this method actually work? Does it control the error rate that it's supposed to control? Does it work better than other methods? Do you establish comparison with the other procedures that are out there? How is it better? How is your mousetrap better than the existing mousetrap? Is usually the methodology question. And so the problem is simply to show that, and to show it convincingly. First, to show that it is a good mousetrap, that it's a better mousetrap than something that's out there already, and to establish a need for it. So those are the kind of issues that I, for my own research in statistical theory and methods.
Peter, do you see, I mean, that's a type of data situation that's not uncommon in organizational settings as well. Do you see any similarities between the approaches that people take to that problem in the social sciences as compared to biomedical context?
You know, I don't, because it seems to me that people aren't that concerned about the multiple comparisons problem in the social sciences. And I wouldn't try to argue that they should be necessarily. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. With any kind of methodology, there's pluses and minuses. You know, there's yin and yang. You want to give up something, if you want to get something, you got to give something. And if you want to control type 1 error rates, you're going to have to inflate type 2 error rates. And it's sort of that balance of what are you willing to accept. I would be just happy if people would recognize that there is an issue. Whether they do anything about it or not, I don't care. I've got some great methods. You can look at my books and see, and be happy if you wanted to, because there's good methods that are out there to do this. Software is available. It's all, it's pretty.
So do you think which of those? So do you think it's the concern with the type 1 error or the type 2 error that leads to that?
That leads to
this kind of let's use the term relative indifference to the problem.
Yeah, well, it's the type 2 error concern. I mean, you're worried. So if you want to control type 1 errors, you've got to drop down the alpha to something lower. So 0.05 is the usual threshold. You've got to drop it down to whatever, 0.01 or something. And if you do that, of course, you inflate the chance of missing something that's potentially important. I think actually the bigger issue is not really that, but sort of the whole data snooping, data massaging kind of issue, and I think we all kind of know that this goes on, that you have a story to tell, you got a data set, and you want to tell the story, and you sort of, you try this, you try that, you exclude this case, you look at this subgroup, you sort of do this analysis and that analysis, and you finally get it and say, good, I got a story I can tell. And it's after you've done a whole bunch of different things to kind of get to that point, and then you go back and say, okay, now let's forget that we actually did all that and develop all the theory, as if we did it before we even looked at the data. And it's very much related to the whole, multiple comparisons issue, but from a different angle. And I understand that that's the way the game is played. I think the real proof is in replication. I mean, how do we get around this problem? And so I think in the typical social sciences paper, what you say is, well, we got good theory. We know the result's right because the theory's right. And sort of the data analysis, well, that's just window dressing. We got a good story. And so the data analysis, we don't really worry about it. And I think for where, and I hate to characterize things in such simplistic ways, but I think one way that social science research tends to differ from biomedical research is that there's not quite as much replication. In biomedical research, if you're going to say this drug cures cancer, you better be sure, and so if somebody says it does, then somebody will follow it up. There'll be a follow-up study. And you see a lot of these, and sometimes the follow-up studies overturn the original ones. Fascinating paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association about 2 or 3 years ago by a guy named Ioannidis. He's a Greek guy, does meta-analysis, and he found that he looked at about 40 types of studies that said, here's what you do. You do this medical intervention to improve your whatever. And these were very highly cited papers, and they all had implications on practice, on how doctors actually prescribe therapies to people. And he found among those 40 studies, they were followed up by very good studies, and in 10 of those 40, and I don't know if I have the numbers right, but 25% of the follow-up studies essentially overturned this result that was considered essentially, medical dogma, that this is what you do, and it was an important kind of thing. And so I thought that was fascinating. But these studies were actually randomized comparative trials. And you would think, well, good grief, randomized comparative trial, what could be a better study?
Yeah.
It's causal and everything. And he found that 10% of them were overturned. And he also did the same thing with observational studies. And the story there was kind of frightening. It was 80% overturned. Results from observational epidemiology studies, and 80% of the replicated ones actually overturned the result from the original, and that was actually a little bit scary.
Yeah.
But I think for social sciences research, the question is, do you replicate? Do people actually go out? Or do you care? You wonder, is it that important where you want to replicate, or you just put it out there and you say, okay, that's it, and we'll just leave it? Or, it just seems like, as a scientist, I want replication. I want to see things be consistent. I think a scientific fact is something that does replicate. And so if something's out there, people say this is the way it is. I don't know, maybe it'd be nice if there was more of an avenue in the social sciences research to say, we should replicate. We should have replication studies, because we're not so sure. Just because it's in the literature, it's not sacrosanct. It's not like, okay, that's it, and they said it, it's right. I think there's lots of possibilities for things to actually go in other directions. But the problem is, it's hard to publish that, because if you confirm the other study, what do you say? Well, okay, so what? We already knew that. And if you disprove the other study, then you've got that whole edifice of the authors and their reputations, and they don't want to see this published. And I think you have a harder sell. So I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but I personally would like to see a lot more replication. And, in general, I think it's not a bad idea to try to borrow things from other disciplines. I know you had another question there about what people be doing in terms of research and so forth. And if I could put in a plug for try to get a little cross-disciplinary. Look and see what people are doing in medicine. See what they're doing in engineering, and vice versa. Engineering folks can look and see, make good uses of structural equations models for some of their strength. I work with ergonomics people, and strength, is a measure that they use in their ergonomic models, and strength could be considered a latent variable. Maybe use that, and so I think there's a lot of cross-fertilization that could be done and should be done. And people ought to say, okay, the science over here really is the same science over here. Let's just, sure, this is human sciences, and this is biological sciences, and this is physical and engineering sciences, but it's all, I think, basically science, and the same kind of scientific principles that apply in one area mostly ought to apply in another, at least at a fundamental level. So I would like to encourage more of that, I guess, if I could put in a plug for doing good science.
Sounds like great advice. Peter, within the area of statistics, do you think there are sub-areas that folks are doing a particularly good job of investigating, or are there areas where you feel like that maybe the field is adrift or missing the point on something?
Wow, that's a broad one. What subfields are there in statistics? I guess you could start at the top and maybe say there's the dichotomy between frequentist and Bayesian, and that would be one way I would want to split it up sort of at the outset. I don't know if quite that's where you were going, or if you were thinking about disciplines of biostatistics versus engineering statistics.
How about from a problem perspective? Are there some problems that statisticians are doing a particularly effective job at investigating versus other types of problems that you think they're not?
Again, problems. What do you mean by problem? I guess I have a hard time really finding what box you're going at, Larry. What is the box we're talking about with problems? Because I guess.
How about analytical techniques? Are there some analytical techniques as statisticians pursue them? That they're really advancing the understanding of a particular technique, and others that maybe aren't proceeding?
Well, I think I can get an angle. I can get an inroad here a little bit. One of the things that I think we kind of not really missed the boat, but we missed a marketing opportunity on is the whole computational statistics area. A lot of the computer scientists develop a lot of statistical tools like neural nets. Let's pick that one for an example. That you know, they sort of seem to want to co-opt the whole area of statistics and say this is computer science. And we had the data mining tools in statistics, going back a long time before the computer scientists discovered statistics. But we didn't advertise them particularly well. We're not particularly good at self-promotion as a discipline. And I think that may be one of our biggest failings, is we tend to be more sort of negative and skeptical and say, you know, oh, don't do this, and oh, don't do that, and don't do that, and oh, don't do that either. And so by the time you say don't do everything, you have nothing left to do. And then the computer scientists came along and said, hey, here's something you can do neural nets. And there related kinds of things have been out there, and a lot of other related methodologies have been developed since then by statisticians. I think we do a great job. I don't know. I'm a statistician. I'm a member of the ASA. I'm an editor of a statistics journal. So when you say what aren't we doing well, I don't want to sound like George Bush and say, what mistakes have I made here and not be stumped here. I think probably our biggest failing, if you want to know our failing as a profession, is just not making the connections with the applications folks. Being a little bit too self-absorbed in questions of maybe aren't that interesting. They're sort of a little too narrow. Sort of, we optimize in a very small set. Say, okay, we got a great solution for this problem, but it's optimal within a set that's this small. We'd really rather have a solution that maybe isn't optimal, but at least it works well over a set that's this big. Try to get a little bit more in touch with the applications folks. I guess if I had a bailiwick that I would like to promote here to the statisticians that are out there, as well as to anybody out there, is that do more decision theory. Develop more decision models. You've got models, and what do they do? Okay, great, you got a model, good. Now what is the actual action item? Where does the rubber hit the road? What do you do with it, and how do you know that that's the best thing to do? You could relate that to the whole hypothesis testing problem, for example. It's type 1 and type 2 errors. Well, what are the costs? If you make a type 1 error, what is really the cost? If you make a type 2 error, what is really the cost? And the cost really shouldn't be, well, if I make a type 2 error, I don't get to get published. Because that's sort of like, it's sort of self-serving. It just, it's too internal. And I would really like to see the costs be more societal, or more, just, I don't know, bigger, something that really means something. And that really, it means really thinking about what the heck you're doing. What do we really get out of this stuff? Let's put costs on there. And with statistical data, it is random, it is variable, and so you're not going to make the right decisions. And so what are the decisions that you're making, and what are the consequences of making the decisions correctly or incorrectly? It's very easy to put that into the marketing framework, where you either send somebody a promotional flyer or you don't. And if you send them something and they don't buy it, well, there's a cost because you sent them something. And if you didn't send somebody something and they might have bought it, there's a cost. And that's very much related to the whole type 1, type 2 error thing. So I think trying to actually create models where you optimize, you optimize your decision making. That would be a place I'd like to see us all go to. But we're statisticians and non-statisticians, methodologists, they don't seem to be doing that. And I would like to see it at least as a framework for thinking about what the heck is the point of all this stuff. There ought to be a point. And if you really start thinking about costs, I think, if nothing else, you'll start to think more clearly about what is the point anyway.
Yeah. Peter, we expect a fair number of people will be earlier in their career that watch my interview with you and interviews with others. And I guess I'm wondering whether you have any particular kind of advice, career advice or scholarly advice that you would offer to those young people.
Yeah, try to do good. Like Mark Twain said, if I can get this right, always do good. It will astonish some people and gratify the others, or something. Did I get that right? It's just sort of a direction to try to be professional and try to, just get in the habit of it. One thing that I do with teaching my graduate students in my classes is I try to make them write their assignments, even if it's just sort of almost a dorky, mathy kind of a thing, to write it well. You know, just don't give me an answer. Just don't show a stupid scratched out set of equations. You know, start with a preface. You know, why it's important, and try to look for bigger pictures, and try to write tutorial style, and I think tutorial is a good word. You know, because if you can write so well that you can explain things, then you're on your way. Because journal writing should be explanatory. You know, you should be showing people a roadmap. You should be writing authoritatively and not just sort of, you know, parroting something somebody else did. You know, you certainly want to write in the structure of whatever the literature it is that you're writing in, but you know, try to write with confidence and write authoritatively, and just get into practice of doing that as soon as possible. Be professional. You know, be professional. Of course, you know, as a statistician, I'd say take more statistics classes. And, you know, I think it helps, not necessarily because you're going to be doing all that much statistics, or maybe that you're going to write in a way that a statistician would want to see, or that you're going to be all that careful and, you know, putting everything into Greek letters and everything like that, which I would like, but you won't necessarily do that. But at least so that you know what it is that you're doing, and that you write with confidence, and that somebody reading that paper would say, oh yeah, this person knows what they're talking about. You know, and that level of confidence, I think, shows through. Reviewers reading something where they see confidence, you know, and it's subtle confidence. It's just subtle words that you use that indicate, you know, you're not just copying something somebody else wrote in some other paper, but you really understand it at your own gut, visceral level. I think that shines through. At least it does for me as an editor. When I read stuff and I see that it shows that the person really has thought stuff through, really understands pretty deeply, even though they might not show all the, you know, X's and O's and the equations, but they you know, it's clear that they understand it. So I think I would try to go for that deeper understanding. And yeah, try to be interdisciplinary. I mean, I know there's risk in doing that, because as a young researcher, if you're going to try to take risks, well, you might hit the home run, but then you might be, you know, 6 years down the road with no publications either. And so I understand there's a reality there, and you want to try to not take too many risks, but definitely to be professional and to show confidence. I think I couldn't think of too much more to say.
Yeah. Peter, we talked last night, and through the comments today, you've had a lot of experience teaching statistics to non-statistics, and perhaps a fair number of business students. And I was wondering whether you could just comment on some of the challenges you faced in teaching to that type of audience.
Well, it's been my teaching for the last 25 years, so I've kind of gotten used to it. It was definitely different for me at first, coming from a mathematical background, mathematical statistics, and all the courses I had were in mathematical statistics. So coming in and teaching business students for the first time was it was really strange. You know, I mean, I was teaching about projection matrices and idempotent matrices and vector spaces and all that in my experimental design course, and the students were complaining vociferously. You know, they went to their professors, and so I was teaching vector spaces, and the professor, this accounting professor, came in and handed me what's that, Campbell and Stanley book, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Said, no, this is what we want. We don't want vector spaces. So I don't do much vector spaces anymore, but I don't know. The challenge is finding the right tone. You know, I mean, they're great. They're great students, and they want to learn, and I'm happy to try to teach them and try to get them to get their head on thinking about processes, I guess, is to try to just get them thinking in that mode, get them behind the data, and once they get to the mode of thinking behind the data, to the processes, and this should fit pretty well with their whole research methods courses too, because in their research methods courses they want to, you want to talk about developing theory and all that. Well, you talk about developing theory, and that's all sort of qualitative, but then what I want to get them to do is then to think about that qualitatively developed theory mathematically as a mathematical generative model that will then ultimately produce their data from which they can go back inductively and learn about that model, which has some unknown characteristics. Otherwise, you're not doing the study. You wouldn't have done the study in the first place. So just to get into the mindset of thinking about models is the challenge that I would find the hardest. But it's not necessarily just business students. It's anybody. Getting the engineering students to think about models is going to be the same thing. The math, I think I've found the place with the math that I have to be. I would like them to have a little more math. I mean, I think that would be a biggest challenge, because I think I could go just a little bit farther if they had a little bit more math. But I'm pretty comfortable with where that is now. I mean, I teach them some math and I teach them some statistics, and it's a challenge. I think the hardest part is the conceptualization, though. I mean, the math really isn't that big of a deal. I don't want to make it sort of the first thing. I want to get them to the conceptualization part first, and then say, oh yeah, that's why we need the math.
Mhm.
So to get them first to, you know, think about the idea of a model, and then, okay, it's a mathematical model.
All right, well, Peter, we appreciate you taking the time and sharing the answers to these questions, and certainly giving us some things to think about, and we look forward to your lecture, and thanks again for coming to Richmond.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.